I never expected to find metal spikes in Grandma Eleanor's driveway, but when the HOA started targeting her quaint blue cottage, and I discovered her secret life as a senior prosecutor specializing in real estate fraud, I realized this wasn't just harassment. It was revenge for the case she was building against them. What would these corrupt officials do when they discovered their target was actually the one investigating them? I pulled into Grandma Eleanor's driveway with my suitcase and a box of her favorite donuts. The blue cottage with white trim sat nestled among tall pine trees, looking exactly as it had during all my childhood summers, except for one thing: a bright orange paper flapping in the breeze, stuck to her front door like an ugly warning sign. My stomach dropped as I grabbed the paper. Violation notice, unapproved exterior paint color, action required within 72 hours. This didn't make sense. Grandma's cottage had been this same shade of sky blue for as long as I could remember. "Welcome to Pinehurst Village," a sickly sweet voice called from next door. A woman with perfectly highlighted blonde hair stood at the property line, arms crossed over her designer blouse. "I'm Karen Thompson, HOA Community Standards Committee Chair." I forced a smile. "Hi, I'm Jamie, Eleanor's grandchild. I'm house-sitting while she recovers from surgery." Karen's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Such a shame about Eleanor. We've been neighbors for what, 5 years now? The rules clearly state all exterior paint colors must be approved by the committee." She glanced at the cottage with obvious disapproval. That blue was grandfathered in, but once a property needs repainting, it must conform to our approved palette. Mostly earth tones, you understand? I looked at the cottage again. The paint wasn't peeling or faded. "It looks freshly painted to me." "Our inspector noted significant fading on the west-facing wall," Karen said, the smug certainty in her voice making my skin crawl. "The violation stands 72 hours, or the fines begin at $100 per day." As Karen walked away, I noticed her husband, Robert, watching from their porch. He quickly disappeared inside when our eyes met. Inside Grandma's cottage, everything felt warm and familiar. The handmade quilts, the bookshelf full of mystery novels, the faint smell of cinnamon. I called her immediately at the rehab center. "Jamie, sweetie, I'm so glad you made it." Grandma's voice sounded tired but strong. When I told her about the violation notice, she sighed heavily. "That's the third notice this month, first. It was my roses growing too close to the sidewalk. Then my mailbox being non-standard, despite being the original one from when I bought this place." "But you've owned this cottage for decades," I said. Confused, how can they suddenly enforce these rules now? "That's what happens when developers take over the HOA board," Grandma explained. "Richard Vaughn became president 6 months ago. He's a lawyer for Pinnacle Development Group. They've been buying up properties all over Pinehurst, tearing down the older homes and building giant modern boxes that sell for triple the price." I glanced out the window at Karen's house, a massive gray and white structure that dwarfed Grandma's cottage. "Let me guess. The Thompsons are connected to Pinnacle." "Robert Thompson is the CEO, Grandma confirmed. "They've been after my lot because it's on the corner with the creek view. Perfect spot for their biggest model home." I felt a chill despite the warm June air. "I'll handle this, Grandma. Just focus on getting better." After hanging up, I decided to inspect the property. In the backyard, I noticed several of Grandma's prized rose bushes had been cut back severely. Not pruned carefully, as she would have done, but hacked crudely. Strange. As I walked around to check the faded west wall, which looked perfectly fine, my foot caught on something in the gravel driveway. I bent down and felt my blood run cold. Partially buried in the gravel were metal spikes, not just one, but several, positioned right where car tires would roll. I carefully collected the spikes using a garden glove I found in Grandma's shed. These weren't just litter. They were caltrops designed specifically to puncture tires. Someone had deliberately placed them in my grandmother's driveway. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the violation notices, the cut roses, and those metal spikes. This wasn't random harassment or strict rule enforcement. This felt coordinated, deliberate. A campaign to make Grandma Eleanor so miserable she'd sell her beloved cottage. I spent hours researching Pinterest Village HOA regulations on my laptop. The rule book was over 200 pages long, but nowhere did it specify approved paint colors or mention that grandfathered properties would need to conform to new standards. In fact, Section 1204 specifically protected historic properties from retroactive standard changes, and Grandma's cottage, built in 1932, definitely qualified. Around midnight, headlights swept across the living room wall as a car crept slowly past the cottage. I peeked through the curtains to see a black SUV moving with its lights dimmed, stopping briefly in front of Grandma's house before continuing down the street. I grabbed my phone and took several photos as the vehicle turned around at the end of the cul-de-sac and drove past again. The license plate was partially visible, enough to confirm my suspicions when I made out PNCL1 on the vanity plate. Pinnacle! What were they doing watching the house at midnight? The violation notice suddenly felt like the smallest of my worries. Morning brought another unwelcome surprise. The cottage's mailbox had been smashed overnight, bent at an odd angle as if hit by something heavy. Inside was another orange notice, this one claiming improper yard maintenance with a new 48-hour deadline. I photographed everything before straightening the mailbox as best I could. This was getting ridiculous. As I headed back inside, Karen Thompson appeared in her front yard, ostentatiously watering plants while watching me. "Terrible about that mailbox," she called out. "The teenagers around here can be so destructive. You really should replace it with one of the approved models. I have a catalog if you need it." I forced myself to remain calm. "Thanks, but I'll just repair this one. It's an original feature of the property." Karen's smile tightened. "Well, damaged mailboxes are against regulations. The committee will have to issue another violation if it's not replaced properly." I'd had enough. "I'll be sure to bring all these violations to the next HOA meeting." "When is that, by the way?" Something flickered in Karen's eyes. Worry, perhaps. "Not for 3 weeks. But Richard can process emergency matters any time. In fact, I'm meeting him this afternoon if you'd like me to mention your situation." "I'll handle it myself," I replied, turning toward the cottage. As I walked away, I heard Karen on her phone. "She's not leaving. No. I don't think she knows anything. We might need to accelerate the timeline." Inside, I paced the small living room, trying to make sense of everything. Why was the HOA suddenly targeting my grandmother? What did Karen mean by accelerate the timeline? And most importantly, who had placed those tire spikes in the driveway? I decided I needed to meet this Richard Vaughn character face to face. According to the HOA website, the office was open today from 1 to 4 p.m. in the community center. I had questions that needed answers and a growing suspicion that something very wrong was happening in Pinehurst Village. The Pinehurst Village Community Center gleamed with fresh paint and expensive landscaping, a stark contrast to the aggressive enforcement being aimed at Grandma's modest cottage. I pushed through the glass doors, clutching a folder containing the violation notices, photos of the tire spikes, and printouts of the HOA regulations I'd studied overnight. A receptionist, with a plastic smile, directed me down a hallway to the HOA office. Through the partially open door, I could hear Karen Thompson's voice, high and insistent. "We need to move quickly on the Curtis property. My sources say she's been asking questions at the county records office." I froze outside the door, straining to hear more. "Patience." "Karen," a man's voice replied, smooth and confident, "the assessment increase goes into effect next week. Between that and the violations, she'll be financially underwater by month's end." "But what if—" Karen stopped suddenly as I pushed the door open. Two faces turned toward me with identical expressions of surprise. Quickly masked by professional smiles, Karen recovered first. Standing up from her chair across from a large mahogany desk, behind it sat a middle-aged man in an expensive golf shirt. His tan face creased with practiced charm. "Jamie, what a coincidence," Karen trilled. "I was just discussing your grandmother's situation with our HOA president." "Richard Vaughn." Richard stood and extended his hand. "A pleasure to meet Eleanor's grandchild. We're all concerned about her property falling into disrepair while she's away." His handshake was firm. His smile rehearsed. I noticed a framed photo on his desk. Richard shaking hands with Robert Thompson in front of a banner reading, "Pinnacle Development Group, building tomorrow's Pinterest today." "Funny you should mention disrepair," I said, pulling out the tire spikes I'd collected. I placed them carefully on his polished desk. "I found these deliberately placed in my grandmother's driveway yesterday." Richard's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "That's concerning. But vandalism is a police matter, not an HOA issue." "I've already filed a police report," I lied smoothly. "They're checking nearby security cameras. I thought you should know, since it happened right after the first violation notice appeared." Karen's face paled slightly. "Are you implying something?" I opened my folder and laid out the violation notices. "I'm implying that these notices cite rules that don't actually exist in your published regulations. Section 12.4 specifically exempts historic properties, like my grandmother's cottage, from retroactive standards changes." Richard's professional demeanor flickered for just a moment. "The board recently voted to remove those exemptions. Without notifying homeowners? That violates state law regarding HOA governance," I countered, thanking my lucky stars for the hours I'd spent researching last night. "The notifications are being processed," Richard said dismissively. "Now, if there's nothing else, Karen and I have business to discuss." "Actually, there is something else." I pulled out one more document, a property map of Pinterest Village with Grandma's corner lot highlighted. "I'm curious why Pinnacle Development submitted building plans for my grandmother's property 3 months ago when she has never expressed interest in selling." The silence in the room was deafening. Richard's mask slipped completely for a moment, revealing cold calculation in his eyes. "Those plans were speculative," he finally said. "Pinnacle often prepares concepts for various properties to streamline development if owners decide to sell." "Interesting approach," I replied, "especially combined with targeted harassment that might pressure those same owners to sell." Karen stood abruptly. "That's an outrageous accusation. The HOA simply enforces community standards equally for everyone." "Really? Then you won't mind if I request records of all violations issued in the past 6 months. Public records laws apply to HOAs in this state." Richard's jaw tightened. "Submit your request in writing. We'll respond within the legally required 30 days. "I already did," I said, pulling out a certified mail receipt. "Sent it yesterday to both the HOA office and the State Housing Authority. They seemed very interested in potential pattern targeting." This was another bluff, but watching their reactions told me everything. Karen's face flushed red while Richard maintained his cool facade, though a vein pulsed visibly in his temple. "We're done here," Richard said firmly. "If you have concerns, bring them to the next board meeting like everyone else." As I turned to leave, Richard added, "By the way, the board approved a special assessment for corner properties last month. Your grandmother will be receiving notice of a $300 monthly increase starting next week for infrastructure improvements." The threat was thinly veiled. "Back off, or things will get worse." I kept my expression neutral despite the anger boiling inside me. "I'll make sure she gets the notice, and I'll make sure the housing authority gets a copy." 2, outside in the parking lot, I leaned against my car, hands shaking slightly from the confrontation. This was bigger than harassment. It was organized, systematic pressure to force people from their homes. As I looked back at the community center, I spotted Karen watching me through the window, phone pressed to her ear. I needed allies and information. According to Grandma, she'd lived in Pinterest Village for 30 years. She must have friends here. people who might know what was happening or had experienced similar pressure. As I pulled out of the parking lot, a silver sedan began following me, keeping a consistent distance. I turned down several random streets, and the car stayed with me. Only when I headed toward the police station did it finally peel away. My phone rang. An unknown number, I answered cautiously. "Is this Eleanor Curtis's grandchild?" A woman's voice asked, quiet and nervous. "Yes, this is Jamie. Who's calling?" "My name is Sofia Ramirez. I live across the street from your grandmother." Her voice lowered further. "Don't go back to the cottage right now. They're watching it. Meet me at the Riverside Cafe in 20 minutes. I have information about what's happening to Eleanor and the others." "Others?" I asked, my concern deepening. "Your grandmother isn't the first they've targeted," Sophia replied, "but she might be the one who finally stops them if you help her." 20 minutes. Come alone." The line went dead. I sat in my idling car, wondering if this was a trap or a genuine offer of help. Either way, I needed to know more as I turned toward downtown and the Riverside Cafe. One question kept circling in my mind. What did Sophia mean about Grandma being the one who finally stops them? What exactly did my cookie-baking, mystery novel-reading grandmother know that made her so important in all this? Glass crunched under my feet as I swept up the broken flower pot thrown through Grandma's window. The note wrapped around the rock was clear. "Sell now or worse will come." My hands shook with anger. This wasn't just mean neighbors anymore. This was criminal. "You okay over there?" called Mr. Washington from across the street. He pointed to his doorbell camera. "Got that on video if you need it." I nodded, grateful, and hurried back inside. I needed Grandma's property papers to fight the HOA's claims about the blue paint. Her study was neat but packed with boxes labeled by year. In the corner sat a small filing cabinet with a heavy padlock I'd never noticed before. The rain started pouring as I searched for the key. Lightning flashed through the window, illuminating Grandma's keyring on her desk. A tiny golden gavel hung from it, a strange charm I'd always wondered about. On a hunch, I tried it in the lock. It clicked open. Inside wasn't just property papers. The top folder read, "Pinnacle Development Group, Evidence File." My heart raced as I flipped through photos of Richard Vaughn shaking hands with men in expensive suits, bank statements, secret recordings, maps of neighborhoods with properties circled in red. "What are you doing with my case files?" I jumped at Grandma's voice on my phone. I must have hit speed dial by accident. "Grandma, why do you have investigation files on Karen's husband's company?" My voice came out as a whisper. Silence hung for a moment. "Jamie, I need you to listen carefully. That file box contains evidence I've spent 2 years gathering. I'm not just a retired schoolteacher. My cookie-baking, garden-loving grandmother's voice turned stern in a way I'd never heard. "I'm Senior Prosecutor Eleanor Curtis, White-Collar Crime Division. The hip surgery story is my cover while I build this case." I sank into her chair. Stunned? "The Pinnacle Company. They're targeting homes here across 3 counties. They force out elderly residents using HOA violations, then buy the properties cheap. Richard handles the legal side. Karen scouts vulnerable targets." Her voice lowered. "They've done this to 26 senior citizens already. I moved here undercover when we noticed the pattern." I stared at the photos spread across the desk. "That's why they're after your cottage. They have no idea who I am. But they want my property for its lake access. I've been gathering evidence while—" A thunderous crash from downstairs cut her off. I peered through the blinds to see Karen's SUV speeding away. Downstairs, I found the living room window completely shattered, rain pouring in over broken glass. "Jamie, what happened?" Grandma's voice called from the phone I dropped on the desk. As I ran back upstairs, I noticed a folder missing from the box, the main evidence file. My stomach dropped as I grabbed the phone. "Someone broke in. I think they took your case file." "Check the blue book on the 3rd shelf," Grandma said calmly. I pulled down an old cookbook to find it hollowed out. Containing a USB drive and backup files. Always keep copies, Grandma said. Now you're in danger. They've seen you there, and they'll assume you know everything. A car door slammed outside. Through the window, I spotted Richard Vaughn walking purposefully toward the cottage, phone to his ear. Behind him, Karen's SUV idled at the curb. "They're here," I whispered. "Back door now," Grandma commanded. "Take the files to Sophia Ramirez at 156 Maple. She's been helping me build the case." The doorbell rang, followed by aggressive knocking. "Jamie, open up! We need to discuss the additional violations on your grandmother's property." Richard's voice boomed through the door. I grabbed the remaining files and the USB, shoving them into my backpack as the knocking grew louder. "One more thing," Grandma said urgently. "In my bedroom closet, behind the shoe rack." The front door splintered open with a crash. Heavy footsteps entered the cottage. "I have to go," I whispered, ending the call. The back door was just across the hallway. If I moved quietly enough, I might make it out. I crept from the study, backpack clutched tight against my chest. "Check upstairs," I heard Richard say. "Find those documents." Footsteps started up the stairs as I slipped toward the back door. My hand was on the knob when Karen's voice froze me in place. "Going somewhere?" she asked, blocking my exit with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your grandmother asked me to water her plants while she's away," I lied, trying to look innocent despite the backpack clutched against my chest. Karen's eyes narrowed as she blocked the back door. "Then you won't mind if we check what's in that bag," she said, reaching for my backpack. "Richard, I found them downstairs." My heart pounded against my ribs. I needed a distraction, fast. I pretended to stumble, knocking over a vase that crashed to the floor while Karen jumped back from the shattering glass. I bolted past her, shoving the screen door open and sprinting across the wet grass. "Stop her!" Karen screamed behind me. Rain soaked me as I ran between houses, mud splashing up my legs. I had no idea where 156 Maple was, but I needed to get away first. Richard's angry shouts faded as I cut through a neighbor's yard and ducked behind a garden shed. Catching my breath, I pulled out my phone to search for Sophia's address. The map showed Maple Street just 2 blocks over. As I prepared to run again, a text buzzed from an unknown number. "Behind you? Don't scream. I'm a friend." I whirled around to find an elderly woman with steel-gray hair holding an umbrella. "Sophia Ramirez," she said quietly. "Eleanor texted me. Come quickly." She led me through a series of backyard shortcuts to a small yellow house with a beautiful garden. Once inside, Sophia locked 3 separate deadbolts. "Welcome to Resistance Headquarters," she said, gesturing to a dining room where 3 other seniors sat around a table covered with maps and documents. A tall man with white hair stood. "Judge Marcus Johnson, retired," he introduced himself. "Eleanor told us you have the files." I nodded, pulling out the USB and papers. "Perfect," said a woman with reading glasses and a notebook. "Debbie Patel, editor of the Pinehurst Gazette. I've been tracking property transfers for months." The 4th person, a man with a laptop open in front of him, nodded. "Tyler Washington. Those cameras on my house aren't just for show." Sophia made me hot chocolate as they explained how Pinnacle Development's scheme worked. They targeted senior communities, infiltrated the HOA board, then created impossible rules and violations until homeowners gave up and sold cheap. "Your grandmother moved here intentionally," Debbie explained. After the 3rd county showed the same pattern, she decided to gather evidence from the inside. Tyler turned his laptop to show me footage of Richard and Karen placing the caltrops in Grandma's driveway, then later breaking the windows. "We have everything," Marcus said, "but we need your grandmother's case files to connect all the dots legally." I pulled the USB from my pocket. "Everything's here, but they know I have it now." "They'll come after me," Sophia smiled. "That's exactly what we want." The 4 seniors revealed their plan. Each had been gathering different pieces of evidence for months. Judge Marcus had court connections. Debbie could publish the story. Tyler had surveillance. Sophia knew every resident affected. But we need one more thing, Debbie said. And that's where you come in. She unrolled a property map of Pinehurst Village. Red X's marked homes that had been pressured into selling. Blue circles showed homes currently being targeted. In the center, a large plot of land contained all the properties Pinnacle had acquired. This is their real goal, Marcus explained, pointing to a document showing plans for a luxury resort. They need just 4 more properties, including your grandmother's cottage. Tomorrow night is the emergency HOA meeting, Sophia said. They're planning to vote on foreclosures for delinquent properties, Tyler typed rapidly on his laptop. According to their emails, which they really should have encrypted better, they plan to use the meeting to claim legal authority to force sales. How do you have their emails? I asked, amazed. I was an IT security specialist before retiring. Tyler grinned. And Richard uses the same password for everything. His dog's name plus his birth year. Amateur. A plan formed as we talked. We would attend the meeting, bring affected residents, and expose everything. But we needed Grandma Eleanor there to make the legal case stick. I'll call her, I said, reaching for my phone. No phones, Sophia interrupted. They could be tracking you. Use my landline. As I dialed, Debbie handed me a newspaper article she drafted. The headline read, State Prosecutor uncovers massive housing fraud ring in Pinehurst Village. My eyes widened as I read. You can't publish this yet, I warned. Of course not. Debbie winked. It's for after tomorrow's meeting, Grandma answered on the third ring. When I explained our plan, she was silent for a moment. It's too soon, she finally said. We need more evidence connecting Robert Thompson directly. We have it, Tyler called out, turning his screen to show security footage of Robert meeting with Richard behind the community center, exchanging documents. Send that to my secure email, Grandma said when I described it, and tell Sophia to activate Protocol Checkmate. Sophia's eyes lit up. She's ready to move. Finally, after hanging up, Sophia explained that Protocol Checkmate meant Grandma would arrive with her team from the Attorney General's office. Everything had to be perfectly timed. As we finalized details, the lights suddenly went out through the window. I spotted Karen's SUV slowly cruising past Sophia's house. They're looking for you, Marcus said quietly. Tyler, show our young friend the basement. Tyler led me downstairs to a small but comfortable room. Welcome to our safe house, he smiled. We've helped 3 other residents hide here when things got rough. As I settled in, trying to process everything, Sophia handed me a legal pad. Write down everything you've seen since arriving. Times, dates, exact words used. We need your testimony to be precise. I started writing, but paused when I heard a noise upstairs. Sophia came down minutes later, her face pale. They just posted an update to the HOA newsletter. The meeting has been moved up to tomorrow morning instead of evening. Marcus frowned. They're trying to rush this through before Eleanor can get here. Can we delay them? I asked. Debbie's smile turned mischievous. Leave that to me. I have press credentials and a lot of very detailed questions that will need answering before any vote can happen. As the others went upstairs to adjust our plan, I found a photo that had fallen from one of the files. It showed Karen and Richard standing next to a prison. The caption read, Thompson visits. Former HOA President James Willis, convicted in similar scheme. 2022. This wasn't their first time. They'd done this before, and someone had gone to prison for it. The stakes were even higher than I'd thought. I heard cars pulling up outside, peering through the small basement window. I saw Richard knocking on Sophia's front door, flanked by 2 men I didn't recognize. One wore a security uniform with the Pinehurst Village logo. Ems. Ramirez. Richard's voice carried through the window. We're conducting a wellness check on all elderly residents tonight. May we come in? At 11 p.m., Sophia responded incredulously, I don't think so. I sank back against the wall. heart racing. This wasn't just about property anymore. With what we knew, we were all in danger. Upstairs, I heard Sophia firmly shutting the door. Moments later, Tyler appeared at the basement stairs. "Pack up," he whispered. "They're watching the house. We need to move everyone before morning." As I gathered the files, a text buzzed on the burner phone Sophia had given me. It was from Grandma. "Don't go to the meeting. This is a trap. They know who I am." My hands shook as I watched Karen and Richard through Sophia's kitchen window. They were stuffing official-looking papers into mailboxes, perfect smiles plastered on their faces. I ducked when Karen glanced our way. "They're delivering foreclosure notices," Sophia whispered. "Special meeting tomorrow night to vote on problem properties." My phone buzzed. Grandma Eleanor's voice was stronger than I'd heard in weeks. "I'm coming home now," she said. "We're setting a trap," I gasped. "But your recovery?" "Some things matter more than my hip," she cut in. "I've got a team from the Attorney General's office ready. We need those two to reveal their whole plan on record in front of witnesses." Judge Marcus leaned forward. "Your grandmother has been building this case for months. Pinnacle Development has forced out elderly homeowners in 5 communities already." "We need to play dumb," Debbie advised, her reporter's notebook filled with dates and names. "Let them think they're winning." Hours later, I helped Grandma Eleanor unpack in secret at Judge Marcus's house. She looked smaller than I remembered, but her eyes flashed with determination as she spread files across his dining table. "Their mistake was targeting me," she said, showing me photos of Richard meeting Robert Thompson outside his law office. "They didn't know I was already investigating Pinnacle when I bought here." The doorbell rang. Tyler rushed in with a tiny device. "Got it?" Audio recorder disguised as a hearing aid. He handed it to Grandma. "Just press the earpiece once to start recording." "We need them to admit everything publicly," Grandma explained. "The HOA meeting is our chance." That night, I couldn't sleep. What if Karen and Richard discovered our plan? What if Grandma wasn't strong enough yet? Outside my window, I spotted a car idling across the street. Someone was watching the cottage. The next day crawled by. I paced Grandma's living room, rehearsing what to say. At 6:30 p.m., Judge Marcus arrived to drive us to the community center. "Remember," he cautioned, "act surprised and upset when they announce the foreclosures. We need their full confession." Grandma checked her hearing aid and straightened her blouse. For a moment, I saw the prosecutor she'd been all these years, sharp, focused, unstoppable. The community center buzzed with nervous chatter when we arrived. Karen's smile faltered when she spotted Grandma Eleanor leaning on my arm. Richard nearly dropped his gavel. "Eleanor, what a surprise," Karen stammered. "We weren't expecting you until next month." "I recovered faster than expected," Grandma replied sweetly. "Couldn't miss an emergency meeting about my own property." Richard quickly composed himself. "Please take a seat. We're about to begin." From across the room, I spotted Sophia, Debbie, and 5 other neighbors I hadn't met. All older residents, all looking worried. This wasn't just about Grandma's cottage anymore. Richard rapped his gavel. "First item, vote on foreclosure proceedings for 7 properties with outstanding violations and unpaid special assessments." My heart pounded as he projected a spreadsheet showing the properties. Grandma's cottage listed first, followed by Sophia's house and 5 others. "As you can see," Richard continued smugly, "these properties have failed to comply with our standards. The board recommends immediate foreclosure proceedings." Karen stood, clipboard clutched to her chest. "Pinnacle Development has generously offered to purchase these distressed properties at 60% of market value, saving these unfortunate homeowners from further embarrassment." A murmur rippled through the room. I glanced at Grandma, who nodded slightly. I shot to my feet. "That's robbery! My grandmother's property has no legitimate violations." Richard's face hardened. "Young lady, your grandmother's cottage violates 6 different bylaws, and she's 3 months behind on special assessments." Special assessments you invented last month, I countered. Karen stepped forward. The board's decision is final. These properties damage our community's value. Robert has investors waiting to build modern homes that will boost everyone's property values. So, that's what this is about, Grandma Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Forcing out long-term residents for your husband's development company. Richard slammed his gavel. That's enough security. Please remove Ms. Curtis and her granddaughter. Two men moved toward us, but froze when the back door swung open. 4 people in suits entered, badges visible. Actually, Grandma said, standing straighter now, I believe this meeting should continue. My colleagues from the Attorney General's office are very interested in hearing about these special assessments and your connection to Pinnacle Development. Karen's face drained of color. Richard lunged for his laptop, but Tyler was faster, grabbing it. I have some interesting footage everyone should see, Tyler announced. Connecting the computer to the projector, the screen flickered to life, showing Richard and Karen placing spikes in Grandma's driveway, then later meeting with Robert Thompson as he handed them an envelope. "This meeting is over," Richard shouted, making a break for the side door. 2 officers blocked his path. "Richard Vaughn, Karen Thompson," one said formally. "We have some questions about your real estate practices across 3 counties." Grandma Eleanor stood, no longer leaning on me or her cane. "And I have a warrant to search the HOA financial records and your personal communications with Pinnacle Development." She turned to the stunned room. "I apologize for the deception, neighbors. I'm not just Eleanor Curtis, retiree. I'm Senior Prosecutor Eleanor Curtis. White-collar crime division." Karen collapsed into a chair, mouth opening and closing like a fish. Richard's face contorted with rage. "You'll never prove anything," he spat. Grandma smiled, removing her hearing aid and holding it up. "I believe I just did." The room erupted in gasps as state police officers filed in behind my grandmother. Eleanor Curtis stood tall despite her cane, her eyes locked on Richard's panicked face. "This isn't what it looks like," Richard stammered. Backing away from the projector, still showing him placing spikes in Grandma's driveway. "Save it for court," said the lead officer, reading Richard his rights while another approached Karen, whose face had drained of all color. I couldn't help smiling as neighbors began whispering, connecting all the dots. "Mrs. Ramirez squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes. Your grandmother was building this case for all of us," she whispered. Outside, news vans were already pulling up. Grandma's team from the Attorney General's office had tipped off reporters about the sting operation. Debbie from the local paper winked at me as she snapped photos. 3 weeks later, Grandma's blue cottage looked better than ever. The roses climbed freely without fear of violation notices. Neighbors dropped by with casseroles and thank you cards as news spread about how close Pinarest Village had come to being gobbled up by Pinnacle Development. "The DA is offering Richard and Karen a deal if they testify against Robert Thompson," Grandma told me over lemonade on her porch swing. "But they'd still serve time for property damage and fraud." Judge Marcus stopped by with papers for Grandma to sign. "The new HOA bylaws are ready for review," he said proudly. "No more loopholes for developers to exploit." What surprised me most was how quickly the community healed. Sophia was elected the new HOA president. Tyler installed a free security system for every elderly resident. Even Karen's teenage son came by to apologize and offered to mow Grandma's lawn all summer. "You know," Grandma said, watching children playing across the street where a for sale sign stood in front of the Thompsons' now empty house, "I was planning to retire next month, but I think I'll stay on a bit longer." There are HOAs like this all across the state that need cleaning up. I smiled. "Need a research assistant?" "I'm thinking of changing my major to law,"